Welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your holding the hearing, and I think it's been constructive because we've raised obviously a lot of troubling issues and had the opportunity to hear from some senators who have a lot of interest and background in this. At the Federal Workforce Subcommittee, as you know, we've held some hearings, and in June we held one regarding background investigations and specifically the inability of the OPM Inspector General to effectively audit the revolving fund and really the background investigation process. And that's where the SCORE Act was developed. Senator McCaskill is still here, Senator Tester, and the Chair and Ranking Member and others. And I'm pleased we were able to get that done. Just a couple weeks ago, we got it off the Senate floor. It's a small step, but it does fix that IG issue. And I know, Brenda, you worked with us on that, and we want to continue to follow that and make sure we get that cleaned up. We've got another hearing in a few weeks to continue looking at this issue and others. And Senator Tester again was here earlier. We're going to stay on this at the subcommittee level. I'm going to focus on something that I think is critical if we're really going to get at this issue. And I guess the tragic example recently at the Navy Yard is the unfortunately perfect example of it. But it's not a new issue. It's this whole issue of continuous evaluation. And you know, whether it's the 5-year cycle or the 10-year cycle, this is to me the critical issue that we're missing. And we saw it not just with regard to the Navy Yard, but also with this Ricky Elder case. This is the specialist Ricky Elder who in 2012 shot and killed his commanding officer at Fort Bragg. And then turned the weapon on himself. His clearance timeline was actually reminiscent of Aaron Alexis's. His background investigation was done in 2006. Over the next 5 years after 2006, he was charged twice with assault, once for DUI hit and run, once for felony aggravated assault, by the way, none of which were reported in his personnel security chain. Aaron Alexis, similar, after receiving a security clearance, he received non-judicial punishment for unauthorized absence while in jail for disorderly conduct, another non-judicial punishment for being drunk and disorderly, an arrest for firearm discharge, multiple law enforcement interactions, both military and civilian, a month prior to the incident that would have highlighted his mental health problems. And none of these triggered a reevaluation of his access to classified material, classified facilities, none of those. And I think this is, I mean, every issue raised here today is important, but if we don't get at this interim period between a clearance and, again, whether it's a 5 or 10-year cycle, the next clearance, I think we're going to continue to have these tragic incidences. In 2005, interesting, a year before Ricky Elder enlisted in the Army, 2 years before Aaron Alexis enlisted in the Navy, and 7 years to the date before Ricky Elder's deadly attack, the Department of Defense testified to this committee, and this was in June of 2005, about the Automated Continuous Evaluation System, ACES. And you all said that you're going to continuously evaluate the background and suitability of security clearances. Mr. Prioletta, in your written statement, I didn't hear you say it in your statement, but in your written statement, you noted that 3 years earlier, in 2008, three years later from the 2005 testimony you gave before this committee, in 2008, President Bush directed by his executive order that an individual has been determined to be eligible for or currently has access to classified information shall be subject to continuous evaluation. That was an executive order back in 2008. And I know we've heard today, you know, we're working on this. I heard in response to an earlier question, we have an interagency working group. We're developing a concept of operations. I wrote this down. We're doing research. Again, this has been going on now for a decade. A decade. I mean, if you testified in 2005, it was going on in 2004, maybe more than a decade. So here we are. It's 5 years after the executive order, 8 years after this committee heard about the plans, and we're dealing with the tragedy at the Navy Yard. So I don't know who would like to talk about it. Mr. Lewis, maybe you can talk about DOD. And by the way, you're also talking about putting something in place, but not for another 3 years. And then it would be DOD only. So I guess I'd like to hear what's happening. and Mr. Lewis, again, since DOD is taking the lead on trying to get this in place, I see from the technical report on the project that there have been some pilot projects. You've got 3,600 personnel records who've been searched, and it's working. 65 of those 3,600 end up having clearances suspended or revoked due to derogatory discoveries. Your search algorithms have, found problems. But 3,600 people is a drop in the bucket when we've got over 5 million people with security clearances. So, again, it's been 10 years since we were told, this committee was told, and I quote, "Beta testing results and lessons learned are being incorporated into an initial operating capability of ACES to be in place by the end of 2005. And here we are in 2013. So, taxpayers have paid $11.6 million for this just in the 2 years between 2012 and 2014. I don't know what the development costs are. We're trying to find out, or the costs after 2014 to fully demonstrate its capability at DOD. So can you explain the reasons why this capability will take over a decade to field? Can you give us some sense of the total cost for this and what it's going to cost to field it over at the Department of Defense?
I can't speak to the total cost. I would have to come back with that information, but I can give you a current status of how the automated continuous evaluation system is being used. It does provide on-demand queries of a large number of government and commercial data sources, as well as an analytical capability to flag issues of concern. So that's an existing capability. As you mentioned, it was used in an Army project, and out of 3,300 odd individuals, a total of 100 personnel actions were taken as a result of information identified during those queries. In addition, the Defense Security Enterprise is developing a continuous evaluation concept demonstration, which would take this a step further. So ACES, the Automated Continuous Evaluation System, does a one-time snapshot in time query. This concept demonstration would have real-time updates so that as information became available, it would be pushed into the system. The concept demonstration is currently scheduled to run from April to October of 2014. The anticipated population would be 100,000 cleared military, civilian, and contractor personnel. And so we're anxiously looking forward to completing that concept demonstration. In their interim, we're using ACES for continuous evaluation checks, again, testing the concept, getting more validation, looking at things like privileged users, and some other groups of contractor employees. So this is an ongoing effort. We get results from it on a regular basis, and we are looking to take that to the next level in terms of a true continuous evaluation, which would give feedback to the system as it is developed. So if an individual gets arrested tomorrow, the system would push that back to DOD instead of waiting for DOD to make that query.
You know, you weren't here in this job 9 years ago when we heard that it was going to be in place by 2005, but you're here now. And so, you know, one question I could ask you is, why has it taken so long? And you might say, I don't know, I wasn't in charge. But you're in charge now, and you're saying that you're going to have this fully operational in 3 years. Is that correct?
For the automated continuous evaluation system as it currently stands, it's an operational system. It's still in a research and development mode, but it is an operational system. The limits right now—
I mean, when I say operational, I mean it actually would cover, you know, more than a small percentage of the people who are in between their clearances. I mean, you're talking about taking it from 3,600 up to 100,000. How many security clearances do you have at DOD?
We have about 2.5 million people who are eligible and in access for classified information.
So when are we going to cover those people?
The system, and one of the things we are examining is, can we expand the capability of the system to handle that larger volume? And that is a work in progress and something that we could report back to you on.
Do you think it's important?
Yes, we do. We need to address what happens between investigations. And
So what are you looking for in order to get this done? You're going to get back to us as to what the costs are.
yes,
Have you sought additional funding? Is that what you're thinking is the problem?
it's a question of having the right criteria in place to conduct the evaluations, and then what we do with the data once it's generated from the system.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate that, and how you take action based on that information?
My time is up, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I just, I think we've got to have some answers on this, because if we don't fix this problem, you know, the initial clearance is incredibly important. We've talked a lot about the need to have arrest records and so on, but if you've got this interim period where you're not keeping up with what's happening, in the case of Aaron Alexis, I mean, it was clear as day, and yet there was no system to incorporate that data. So to Mr. Prioletti and on the Intel side, I mean, I want to hear what you're doing too, but we don't have time to get into it right now with this question, but I hope you'll get back to us in writing as to what you're doing, because we're just talking about DOD here. And then finally, I hope that GAO can help us on this to, you know, establish some metrics. Let's come up with a timeline that makes sense. If you're looking for additional resources or something, let us know. But if you know, it's going to take another 10 years because we're doing more pilots and more research and so on, that is unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.